The morning light of 3 suns filtered through the crystal dome of the Galactic University's largest lecture hall. Professor Velthak adjusted his teaching robes and looked out at the sea of alien faces before him. His 4 silver eyes scanned the crowd with satisfaction. Today would be a good day for teaching. The amphitheater was packed with students from across the galaxy. Blue-skinned Aquarians sat in their water-filled chairs, their tentacles moving slowly as they took notes on waterproof tablets. The silicoids looked like living crystals, their bodies catching and reflecting the morning light in rainbow patterns. Several nebulans floated in their containment suits, their gaseous forms shifting and swirling behind transparent walls. Near the back sat a group of Zephyrians, their feathered wings folded neatly against their backs. Professor Velthak had been teaching xenobiology for over 200 years. He was considered one of the finest minds in the field. His research on primitive species had earned him awards from 12 different star systems. Today's lecture was one of his favorites. Among all these exotic beings sat one unremarkable figure. Minho looked perfectly ordinary by galactic standards. He had the standard bipedal form that several species shared, though his skin was a warm brown color rather than the usual blue or silver. His hair was black and straight, and he wore simple clothing that marked him as a student. He sat in the middle section, quietly writing in a paper notebook with what appeared to be a primitive writing instrument. Most students used holographic displays or neural interfaces for note-taking. The paper and pen marked Minho as being from a less advanced world. Several alien students had glanced at him with curiosity when he first arrived at the university. Some whispered among themselves about the strange new exchange student, but most had quickly lost interest. After all, primitive species were admitted to the university occasionally as part of cultural exchange programs. Professor Velthak cleared his throat, and the lecture hall fell silent. His voice was deep and carried well through the vast space. When he spoke, his words were translated instantly into hundreds of languages through the universal communication system. "Welcome, students, to another day of discovery," Professor Velthak began. "Today we will examine one of the most puzzling cases in our galaxy. A species that, by all logical standards, should have gone extinct millions of years ago, yet somehow managed to achieve spaceflight and join the galactic community." A ripple of interest went through the crowd. Several students leaned forward in their seats. The Aquarians' tentacles moved faster, and the nebulans' forms swirled with excitement. "I speak, of course, of the species known as Homo sapiens, or as they call themselves, humans," the professor continued. "These creatures evolved on a small planet they call Earth, located in what they term the Sol system. By all measures of biological success, they should have been eliminated by natural selection long ago." Minho's pen paused for just a moment before continuing to move across his paper. His expression remained neutral, showing only polite academic interest. Professor Velthak activated his holographic display. A 3-dimensional image of a human appeared in the center of the room, slowly rotating so all students could observe it from every angle. The figure looked remarkably similar to Minho, though the resemblance seemed to escape the notice of most students. "Observe the primitive nature of their physical form," the professor said, using a pointer to indicate various parts of the hologram. "No natural armor, plating like the Zephyrians possess, no claws or fangs for hunting, no venom sacs, no electromagnetic organs for sensing prey or predators. They lack the hard shells of the silicoids, the water-breathing capabilities of the Aquarians, and the phase-shifting abilities of the nebulans." A Zephyrian student raised one wing hand. "Professor, if they are so poorly equipped for survival, how did they avoid extinction?" Professor Velthak smiled, showing his own impressive set of sharp teeth. "An excellent question, Kretar. The answer reveals just how random and chaotic evolution can be. Humans survived not through superior adaptation, but through sheer luck and their planet's unusually stable environment." Minho wrote something in his notebook and underlined it twice. "Consider their home world," the professor continued. "Earth is a remarkably gentle planet by galactic standards. Stable climate, abundant water, no significant predator species, and gravity that is considered quite manageable. It is what we might call a nursery world, perfect for allowing weak species to develop without facing real challenges." The holographic display changed to show images of Earth. Green forests, blue oceans, and white clouds created a peaceful scene. Several students made appreciative sounds at the planet's beauty. This benign environment allowed humans to develop what they call intelligence as a survival mechanism, Professor Velthak explained. Unable to compete physically with other species, they learned to use primitive tools and form social groups. This adaptation worked well enough in their protected environment, but it represents an evolutionary dead end in galactic terms. A silicoid student's crystalline form chimed with a question. What about their achievements in space travel, Professor? Surely that demonstrates some capability. Professor Velthak nodded approvingly. Another excellent observation, Quartzvin. Yes, humans did achieve primitive spaceflight, but we must put this in proper context. They took nearly 1,000,000 years to develop from their earliest tool use to their first space vehicles. Compare this to the Aquarians, who achieved interstellar travel within 50,000 years of becoming sentient, or the Zephyrians, who mastered spaceflight in less than 30,000 years. The professor brought up a timeline showing various species development rates. Humans appeared at the very bottom of the chart, their progress labeled in red as extremely slow. Furthermore, Professor Velthak continued, human space technology remains remarkably primitive even now. Their ships require massive amounts of fuel for short distances. They cannot survive in space without bulky life support systems. They have no natural abilities that translate to space environments. In essence, they have managed to achieve spaceflight despite their biology, not because of it. Minho looked up from his notebook for the first time since the lecture began. He glanced around the room, taking in the nodding heads and interested expressions of his fellow students. Then he returned to his writing. The most telling aspect of human biology is their fragility, the professor went on. They require a very narrow range of temperature, atmospheric pressure, and chemical composition to survive. They must consume specific nutrients at regular intervals, or they weaken and die. They require unconsciousness for approximately 1/3 of each planetary rotation cycle. During this vulnerable state, they are completely helpless. Several students made sounds of amazement at such obvious biological flaws. They are also remarkably short-lived, Professor Velthak added. A human might live perhaps 80 to 100 of their planetary years, which translates to barely a moment in galactic terms. This brief existence gives them no time to accumulate significant knowledge or experience. Each generation must relearn everything from the beginning. The holographic display now showed human anatomy in detail. The professor pointed out various systems with his teaching rod. Note the inefficient design of their cardiovascular system, a single heart that can fail catastrophically. Their respiratory system requires constant attention to atmospheric composition. Their digestive system can only process a limited range of foods and is easily disrupted by changes in diet or environment. Minho's pen moved steadily across his paper, filling page after page with neat handwriting. Perhaps most limiting of all, Professor Velthak concluded, is their primitive sensory apparatus. They can only perceive a tiny fraction of the electromagnetic spectrum. They cannot sense magnetic fields, radiation levels, or chemical compositions that other species take for granted. They are essentially blind to most of the universe around them. The lecture hall was completely quiet now, with students absorbed in taking notes about this fascinating example of evolutionary failure. In our next session, the professor announced, we will examine how humans compensate for these biological limitations through their rudimentary technology and why their recent inclusion in the galactic community represents more of a charitable gesture than recognition of any real achievement. As students began gathering their materials and filing out of the hall, Minho remained seated, still writing in his notebook. His expression remained calm and thoughtful, showing no reaction to the professor's detailed analysis of his species' many shortcomings. 3 days later, Professor Velthak stood before his class again, eager to continue his analysis of human limitations. The same diverse group of alien students filled the amphitheater, and Minho sat in his usual spot, notebook and pen ready. Today we will examine the various ways humans attempt to overcome their biological deficiencies, Professor Velthak announced. As we discussed previously, their evolutionary path represents a fascinating study in how inferior species can sometimes achieve limited success through compensatory behaviors. The holographic display activated, showing primitive human tools, stone axes, wooden spears, and simple pottery. Observe how humans began their technological development, the professor explained. Unable to hunt effectively with their weak bodies, they created crude implements to extend their limited physical capabilities. A nebular student's gaseous form swirled with curiosity. Professor, how did such weak creatures manage to become the dominant species on their planet? An excellent question, Miss Tara, Professor Velthak replied. The answer lies in Earth's remarkably gentle ecosystem. Humans faced no serious predator species during their development. The largest threats on their world were relatively small mammals and reptiles that could be avoided through their primitive tool use and group cooperation. Minho's pen scratched quietly across his paper as he recorded the professor's words. Consider their hunting methods, the professor continued. While advanced species like the Zephyrians could hunt from the air using natural weapons, or the Aquarians could use bioelectric stunning capabilities, humans had to chase their prey on foot using pointed sticks. This primitive approach only worked because Earth's animals were equally unsophisticated. The display showed cave paintings of human hunting scenes. Stick figures with spears chased what appeared to be large, clumsy animals. Their development of what they call agriculture further demonstrates their limitations, Professor Velthak explained. Unable to adapt their biology to find food efficiently, they instead attempted to modify their environment to provide predictable nutrition sources. This approach required them to remain in fixed locations, making them vulnerable to environmental changes. Suddenly, a soft chime indicated an incoming communication. A shimmering hologram materialized near the professor's desk. The figure that appeared was clearly human, similar in appearance to Minho, but distinctly female, with long black hair and intelligent dark eyes. I apologize for interrupting, the holographic figure said in perfectly clear galactic standard language. I am Jiwan, a xenobiology researcher from Earth. I have been monitoring your lecture through the university's open academic channels, and I believe there may be some inaccuracies in your presentation that should be addressed. Professor Velthak's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of surprise among his species. I was not aware that humans monitored our academic discussions. However, if you wish to provide additional information about your species, I suppose that could be educational for my students. The alien students shifted with interest. Several had never seen a human speak before, and they watched Jiwan's hologram with curiosity. Thank you, Professor, Jiwan said politely. I noticed you mentioned that humans achieved spaceflight slowly compared to other species. While it is true that our development took time, I think it's worth noting the circumstances under which this occurred. She gestured, and her own holographic display activated alongside the professor's. Images of Earth began to appear, but these were different from the peaceful scenes Professor Velthak had shown. Humans developed technology while simultaneously surviving multiple ice ages, Jiwan explained. Our planet's climate shifted dramatically several times during our evolution, forcing us to adapt to environments ranging from tropical to subarctic conditions. The display showed vast ice sheets covering continents, then retreating to reveal changed landscapes. Additionally, Jiwan continued, we achieved spaceflight while engaged in active warfare across our entire planet. Unlike species that developed in peaceful isolation, humans had to innovate under constant conflict pressure. Professor Velthak's teaching rod trembled slightly in his grip. Surely you exaggerate the difficulties. All species face some environmental challenges during development. Jiwan's expression remained pleasant but determined. Let me share some specific examples. During our medieval period, humans survived what we call the Black Death, a plague that killed approximately 1/3 of our population. Rather than causing civilization collapse, this led to technological and social innovations that accelerated our development. Several alien students made sounds of shock. Population losses of that magnitude typically ended civilizations entirely. Our Renaissance period saw simultaneous advances in art, science, and engineering while different human groups fought continental wars using increasingly sophisticated weapons. We developed navigation, astronomy, and mathematics while sailing across dangerous oceans in primitive vessels. The holographic display now showed human sailing ships battling massive storms. their tiny forms dwarfed by towering waves. During our 20th century, Jiwan went on, humans fought 2 global wars involving nearly every nation on our planet. These conflicts drove rapid innovations in flight, electronics, nuclear physics, and rocketry. We reached our moon less than 25 years after developing nuclear weapons. Professor Velthak's silver scales had taken on a slightly pale tint. These conflicts you describe, they involved your entire species? Yes, and we continued scientific progress throughout, Jiwan confirmed. We mapped our genetic code while developing space stations. We built global communication networks while preparing for potential nuclear war. We established international cooperation treaties while maintaining armies capable of destroying our entire civilization. Minho had stopped writing and was watching the exchange with quiet interest. Furthermore, Jiwan continued, your analysis of our hunting methods appears incomplete. Humans did not simply chase prey with pointed sticks. We developed persistence hunting, a technique where we would literally run large animals to death across distances of 20 to 30 kilometers. An Aquarian student's tentacles writhed with confusion. Run them to death? How is that possible? Humans are among the best endurance runners in the galaxy, Jiwan explained. We can maintain steady motion for hours without stopping. Most prey animals are built for short bursts of speed, but cannot sustain effort over long distances. We would track them at a steady pace until they collapsed from exhaustion. Professor Velthak's 4 eyes narrowed. Surely this is an exaggeration. The energy requirements alone would be prohibitive for such a hunting method. Not at all, Jiwan replied. Human metabolism is specifically adapted for sustained activity. We cool ourselves through skin pores that release excess heat as water vapor, a system so efficient that humans can remain active in temperatures that would incapacitate most species. The display showed thermal images of humans running, their bodies releasing visible heat through perspiration. We also developed what we call throwing, the ability to launch projectiles with extreme accuracy over significant distances. A trained human can hit a target the size of a small animal from 50 meters away using nothing but a balanced stick. Several students shifted uncomfortably. The idea of projectile attacks from such distances was unsettling to species that relied on close-range combat. Your description of Earth as a gentle nursery world is also puzzling, Jiwan said. Our planet includes deserts where surface temperatures exceed 60 degrees Celsius, polar regions where water becomes solid, mountain ranges with insufficient oxygen for most life forms, and ocean depths with crushing pressure. The holographic display cycled through images of these environments, showing humans surviving and working in each one. Humans regularly live and work in all of these environments. We have permanent settlements in Arctic conditions, desert research, stations, high-altitude mountain communities, and underwater installations. Professor Velthak was quiet for a long moment, his silver scales now definitely pale. These achievements you describe, they represent normal human capabilities? Quite normal, Jiwan confirmed. I should mention that I am currently speaking to you from a research station located inside an active volcano where we are studying geological processes. The ambient temperature here would be lethal to most galactic species, but humans consider it simply an interesting work environment. The lecture hall had become completely silent. Even the usually active nebulans had stopped their constant swirling motions. I appreciate your willingness to share additional information about human development, Professor Velthak said carefully. Perhaps we should schedule a more formal discussion to review the academic literature on human capabilities. Jiwan smiled pleasantly. Of course, Professor. I look forward to it. I should mention that several of my colleagues have also been monitoring your lectures and would be happy to contribute their expertise. We have researchers specializing in human physical capabilities, psychological resilience, and adaptive technologies, who could provide additional perspective. As Jiwan's hologram faded, Professor Velthak found himself facing a lecture hall full of students who were looking at him with questions in their alien eyes. In the middle section, Professor Velthak had spent the entire night reviewing his research materials. His 4 eyes were rimmed with the silver equivalent of dark circles, and his usually pristine scales looked dull from lack of proper rest. When he entered the lecture hall that morning, he carried himself with less confidence than usual. The students noticed immediately. Whispered conversations in various alien languages filled the amphitheater as they settled into their seats. Everyone was curious about what would happen after the previous day's unexpected interruption. Minho took his usual seat, notebook and pen ready as always. He glanced around at his fellow students with mild interest before opening to a fresh page. Today, Professor Velthak began, his voice slightly less assured than normal. We will continue our examination of human development, incorporating some of the additional information that was provided yesterday. He activated his holographic display, but instead of showing primitive human tools, the images now depicted more advanced technology. Space shuttles, medical equipment, and complex engineering projects filled the air above the students. It appears that human technological advancement may have been more rapid than initially calculated, the professor admitted reluctantly. However, this does not change the fundamental biological limitations that constrain their species. A soft chime announced another incoming communication. Jiwon's hologram materialized again, but she was not alone. Another human figure appeared. Beside her, male, with neat black hair, and wearing what appeared to be a research uniform. "Good morning, Professor," Jiwon said cheerfully. "I hope you don't mind, but I brought my colleague Do-Yun to continue our discussion. He specializes in human physiology and might be able to clarify some points about our biological capabilities." Professor Velthak's scales rippled with resignation. "Of course. Please proceed." Do-Hyun stepped forward with a polite nod. "Thank you, Professor. I understand you mentioned yesterday that humans are biologically fragile and limited by narrow environmental requirements. I wanted to address this with some specific examples." He gestured, and his own holographic display activated showing medical scans and physiological data. "Human bone density is actually remarkable by galactic standards," Do-Hyun explained. "Our skeletal structure can withstand impacts that would shatter the frameworks of most species. A human femur, our largest leg bone, can support approximately 30 times our body weight before fracturing." Several alien students leaned forward with interest. The silicoids, whose crystalline bodies were naturally strong, seemed particularly intrigued. "Furthermore, humans possess what we call a redundant biological design," Do-Hyun continued. "We can survive the complete loss of various organs and continue functioning. Humans routinely live normal lives with only one kidney, one lung, or significant portions of their liver removed." A Zephyrian student raised a wing hand. "How is this possible? Most species require all their organs to maintain life." "Human regenerative capabilities are unusually advanced," Do-Hyun replied. "Our liver can regrow from as little as 25% of its original mass. Our bone tissue constantly rebuilds itself throughout our lives. We can recover from injuries that would permanently disable other species," Professor Velthak interrupted. "Surely these are exceptional cases, not normal human capabilities?" Jiwon smiled. "Actually, Professor, these are baseline human characteristics. Let me share some additional information about human physical performance." Her display showed humans engaged in various athletic activities: running, jumping, lifting heavy objects, and swimming. Humans regularly perform physical feats as recreational activities that exceed the maximum capabilities of most galactic species, she explained. "Our endurance athletes can run over 160 kilometers without stopping. Our strength athletes can lift objects weighing several times their body mass. Our swimmers can remain underwater for extended periods while propelling themselves at high speeds." The images showed humans accomplishing exactly what Jiwon described, their faces showing determination rather than distress. "We also routinely survive environmental conditions that would be immediately fatal to most species," Do-Hyun added. "Humans work in the vacuum of space, at the bottom of oceans under crushing pressure, in radioactive environments, and at temperature extremes that range from -40 to +50 degrees Celsius." A nebular student's gaseous form swirled anxiously. "These temperatures would cause immediate cellular damage to most known life forms." "Yes, but humans adapt," Jiwon replied. "We have permanent research stations in Antarctica where the temperature never rises above freezing, and we operate facilities in desert regions where the ground temperature can melt metal. The same individuals often work in both environments within the same year." Professor Velthak's teaching rod trembled in his grip. Even if we accept these physical capabilities, humans still require technological assistance for space travel, unlike species with natural vacuum tolerance. Do-hyun nodded thoughtfully. True, we need environmental suits for space work. However, I should mention that humans have survived accidental exposure to vacuum and lived to describe the experience. We've also developed the ability to hold our breath for extended periods. The current record is over 24 minutes. Several students made sounds of disbelief. 24 minutes without breathing? An Aquarian asked, tentacles writhing with confusion. How is this possible? Human cardiovascular efficiency is quite remarkable, Do-hyun explained. We can consciously control our heart rate, reduce our metabolism, and redistribute oxygen throughout our bodies. Some humans can slow their heart rate to less than 30 beats per minute while remaining conscious and alert. Ji-won's display now showed brain scans of humans under various conditions. We should also discuss human psychological resilience. Humans routinely expose themselves to potentially fatal situations as entertainment. We jump from aircraft with fabric parachutes, climb vertical rock faces using only our hands and feet, and race vehicles at speeds that would cause immediate death in the event of an accident. And we do this for fun, Do-hyun added with a slight smile. Professor Velthak stared at the display showing humans engaged in these apparently suicidal activities, their faces showing excitement rather than fear. There must be some logical explanation, he said weakly. Perhaps these are mentally unstable individuals. Actually, these activities require exceptional mental stability, Ji-won replied. Humans who engage in extreme sports typically demonstrate superior decision-making abilities, enhanced spatial awareness, and improved stress management compared to the general population. Do-hyun gestured to a new set of images showing humans in various crisis situations: natural disasters, emergency, rescues, and combat scenarios. Human response to genuine danger is equally remarkable, he said. When faced with immediate threats, humans can temporarily increase their strength by up to 40%, ignore severe injuries, and continue functioning despite conditions that would incapacitate most species. We call this hysterical strength, or adrenaline response, Ji-won explained. Human mothers have lifted vehicles weighing several tons to rescue their children. Soldiers have continued fighting effectively despite injuries that should have caused unconsciousness. The lecture hall had become very quiet. Even the normally active nebulans had stopped their constant motion. You mentioned that humans require unconsciousness for 1/3 of each day, Do-hyun continued. While this is generally true, humans can function effectively for extended periods without sleep when necessary. The record for continuous consciousness is over 11 days, and humans have maintained complex mental tasks throughout such periods. Professor Velthak's silver scales had now turned completely pale. These capabilities you describe, they seem inconsistent with the evolutionary limitations that should constrain any species. Perhaps the limitations exist primarily in our current understanding, Ji-won suggested gently. Human evolution occurred under conditions that were more challenging than initially apparent. Our planet's environment selected for adaptability, resilience, and the ability to function effectively under stress. She gestured to images of Earth showing volcanic eruptions, massive storms, and seismic activity. Humans evolved on a world that regularly experiences natural disasters capable of destroying entire civilizations. We developed not just the ability to survive these events, but to rebuild and improve our societies afterward. Each catastrophe made us stronger rather than weaker. Do-hyun nodded. We should also mention that everything we've described represents normal human capabilities, not exceptional ones. Every human possesses these adaptive mechanisms, though they may not always be fully utilized in peaceful environments. As the two human researchers prepared to end their transmission, Professor Velthak found himself staring at his notes, which suddenly seemed woefully inadequate. In the middle section of the amphitheater, Minho continued writing steadily in his notebook, occasionally glancing up with what might have been the slightest hint of amusement in his dark eyes. The next morning brought an unusual tension to the lecture hall. Word had spread throughout the university about the ongoing discussions in Professor Velthak's xenobiology class. The amphitheater was more crowded than usual, with additional students and even some faculty members finding seats or floating spaces to observe. Professor Velthak entered looking haggard. His research staff had worked through the night reviewing galactic databases about human capabilities, and the results had been deeply unsettling. Much of what the human researchers had claimed appeared to be documented fact, though buried in obscure scientific journals that few academics bothered to read. Minho sat in his usual position, but today several empty seats surrounded him. Other students seemed to have unconsciously moved away, though they probably could not have explained why. Today, Professor Velthak announced, his voice carefully controlled, we will examine the practical implications of the human physiological data that has been presented to us. Almost immediately, the communication chime sounded. Jiwon's hologram appeared, but she was joined by yet another human figure, a female with shorter black hair and what appeared to be a military uniform. Good morning, Professor, Jiwon said. I hope you don't mind, but my colleague Sumin wanted to contribute to today's discussion. She specializes in human performance under stress conditions. Professor Velthak's 4 eyes closed briefly in resignation. Of course, please proceed. Sumin stepped forward with crisp efficiency. Professor, I understand there may be some skepticism about the capabilities my colleagues described. I thought it might be helpful to provide some context about human physical performance standards. Her holographic display activated, showing what appeared to be training exercises and performance evaluations. In human military organizations, we routinely require individuals to carry equipment weighing up to 60% of their body mass while moving at high speed across rough terrain for distances of 30 kilometers or more, Sumin explained. Several alien students shifted uncomfortably at the idea of such physical demands. These same individuals must be capable of functioning effectively for 72 hours or more without sleep while maintaining full combat readiness. They must be able to make life-or-death decisions under extreme stress while enduring physical discomfort that would incapacitate most species. The display showed humans engaged in various training activities that looked more like torture to the alien observers. Furthermore, Sumin continued, these performance standards represent the minimum acceptable level for basic military service. Our elite units require significantly higher capabilities. Professor Velthak found himself asking a question he was not sure he wanted answered. What constitutes significantly higher capabilities by human standards? Sumin's expression became more serious. Elite human operators can remain functional for up to a week without sleep while conducting complex operations in hostile environments. They can survive and operate effectively in conditions that would kill unprotected humans within minutes. They can carry equipment loads exceeding their own body weight while maintaining peak performance. An uncomfortable silence fell over the lecture hall. I should also mention, Sumin added, that these capabilities are not unique to military personnel. Human civilian rescue workers, athletes, and explorers regularly demonstrate similar performance levels. We consider this normal human potential rather than exceptional ability. At this point, Minho closed his notebook and stood up. The movement was quiet, but in the tense atmosphere of the lecture hall, it drew everyone's attention. Professor, Minho said, speaking for only the second time since the lectures began, would it be possible to demonstrate some of these capabilities rather than simply describing them? Professor Velthak's scales rippled with uncertainty. What sort of demonstration did you have in mind? Minho's expression remained polite and academically curious. Perhaps we could test some of the physical characteristics that have been discussed. Do any of the students have a standard galactic emergency beacon? I believe those are designed to withstand significant stress. A nervous silicoid student named Quartzveen reluctantly offered a device from their equipment pack. These are rated to survive planetary-scale disasters, they said hesitantly. They're designed to function even after exposure to extreme forces. Minho accepted the device with a polite nod. It was roughly the size of a human hand, made from advanced metallic alloys that could withstand pressures exceeding 1,000 atmospheres. The device was considered virtually indestructible by galactic engineering standards. Thank you, Minho said simply. He examined the beacon briefly, turning it over in his hands as if checking its weight and construction. Then, without ceremony or apparent effort, he crushed it. The metal crumpled between his fingers like paper. The advanced alloys that were designed to survive asteroid impacts folded and twisted under the pressure of Minho's grip until the once sophisticated device became an unrecognizable ball of compressed metal. The lecture hall erupted in shocked sounds from various species. Several students actually moved away from their seats, and one of the Nebulan's containment suits began cycling emergency protocols. Minho held up the ruined device and looked at it with mild interest. "I apologize if this was expensive," he said, to Quartzvin. "I can provide compensation for the replacement cost." Professor Velthak stared at the compressed metal with all four eyes wide. How is that possible? That device should require industrial machinery to deform." Suman's hologram smiled grimly. "What Minho just demonstrated is well within normal human capabilities, though most humans don't realize their own potential. Under stress conditions, human muscle fibers can generate forces far exceeding their apparent limitations. Jiwan's display showed mechanical stress analysis data. Human grip strength can reach levels of over 700 pounds per square inch when fully activated. The emergency beacon was designed to galactic average specifications, which assume maximum forces of approximately 200 pounds per square inch. Additionally, Suman continued, Minho performed that demonstration without engaging what we call hysterical strength responses. A human under genuine stress could generate significantly more force. Do-hyun's hologram materialized alongside his colleagues. "We should explain that humans typically suppress these capabilities in normal, social situations. What your species might interpret as weakness is actually conscious restraint to avoid accidentally damaging their environment or harming other humans." The implications of this statement settled over the lecture hall like a cold wind. "You mean," Professor Velthak said slowly, "that humans deliberately limit their physical capabilities during normal interactions?" "Absolutely," Jiwan confirmed. "Human children learn early in their development to control their strength to avoid breaking objects or injuring playmates. This restraint becomes so automatic that most humans genuinely believe they are physically weak." Suman gestured to data showing human performance under emergency conditions. "However, when circumstances require it, these limitations can be consciously or unconsciously removed. Parents lifting vehicles to save their children, soldiers continuing to fight despite severe injuries, or rescue workers operating effectively under conditions that should cause immediate collapse." Minho had returned to his seat and was examining the crushed beacon with academic interest. "Professor," he said, "I should mention that what I just demonstrated is considered quite normal by human standards. Any adult human could accomplish the same thing, though many choose not to develop their physical capabilities fully." He looked around the lecture hall at the alien faces staring at him with new expressions of uncertainty and concern. "We tend to focus more on intellectual pursuits and social cooperation," Minho continued. "Physical strength is useful, but it's not the most important aspect of human capability." Professor Velthak looked at his teaching notes, which suddenly seemed completely inadequate. What would you consider the most important aspect?" Minho smiled slightly, the first time he had shown any strong emotion during the lectures. "Probably our ability to adapt and learn from any situation. Humans are quite good at finding solutions to problems that initially seem impossible." As if to emphasize his point, he opened his notebook and began writing again, apparently taking notes on his own demonstration and its effects on the other students. The final day of the week brought the largest crowd the lecture hall had ever seen. News of the human demonstrations had spread throughout the university and beyond. Representatives from several galactic research institutions had arrived to observe, along with military analysts and xenobiological specialists from a dozen different worlds. Professor Velthak entered the hall carrying a completely new set of research materials. His pride as an academic had been wounded, but his scientific curiosity had been awakened. If his previous understanding of humans had been so fundamentally flawed, he needed to discover the truth. Minho sat in his usual seat, though the entire section around him was now empty. Other students had unconsciously arranged themselves at what they considered a safe distance from the human who had casually destroyed an indestructible device with his bare hands. "Today," Professor Velthak announced, We will attempt to construct a more accurate understanding of human capabilities and their implications for galactic civilization. The communication chime sounded almost immediately. This time, multiple human holograms materialized simultaneously. Jiwon, Do-hyun, and Sumin were joined by a new figure, a male human with graying hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to command. "Professor," Jiwon said, "I'd like you to meet Tae-hyun, who coordinates human colonial operations. He can provide perspective on how humans function in galactic environments." Tae-hyun stepped forward with a respectful nod. "Professor, I understand you've been analyzing human capabilities. I thought it might be useful to discuss how these translate to practical applications in space colonization." His holographic display showed images of human settlements on various worlds, Arctic planets, desert worlds, high-gravity environments, and even asteroid mining stations. Humans currently maintain active colonies on over 200 worlds across 47 star systems, Tae-hyun explained. These include environments that most galactic species classify as uninhabitable or require extensive technological modification to support life. Professor Velthak's 4 eyes focused intently on the display. "How do humans survive on worlds that require technological modification?" "We adapt the humans rather than modifying the worlds," Tae-hyun replied simply. "Human physiology is remarkably flexible. Our colonists can acclimate to gravity variations ranging from 30% to 300% of Earth normal. We can adjust to atmospheric pressures from near vacuum to levels that would crush most species." The display showed humans working effectively in all these environments, their movements confident and efficient, despite conditions that should have been overwhelming. "Our colonization strategy is quite different from most galactic civilizations," Tae-hyun continued. "Rather than terraforming worlds to match our requirements, we train humans to function in existing conditions. This approach allows us to establish presence on worlds that other species cannot utilize." A senior faculty member from the Zephyrian delegation raised a wing hand. "Surely there must be limits to this adaptability." Suman's hologram stepped forward. "Of course there are limits, but they may not be where you expect them. For example, humans have established research stations in the corona of stars, working in radiation fields that would be instantly lethal to unprotected organic matter. Several alien observers made sounds of disbelief. We accomplish this through a combination of advanced technology and human physiological resilience, Do-hyun explained. Human cellular structure can withstand radiation levels that would cause immediate death in most species. Combined with appropriate shielding, this allows us to work in environments that other civilizations consider completely inaccessible. Jiwon gestured to new images showing human deep space operations. "We should also discuss human psychological adaptability. Humans can function effectively in isolation for extended periods, maintain social cohesion under extreme stress, and continue complex operations despite circumstances that would cause psychological breakdown in most species. Our longest solo space mission involved a human remaining alone in a spacecraft for over 2 years while conducting deep space research," Tae-hyun added. The individual maintained full psychological stability and continued productive work throughout the entire period. Professor Velthak found himself asking questions that challenged his fundamental understanding of galactic civilization. If humans possess these capabilities, why did it take so long for other species to recognize them? Minho looked up from his notebook and spoke quietly. "Because we don't usually find it necessary to demonstrate our capabilities unless circumstances require it." The human holograms nodded in agreement. "Humans generally prefer cooperation to dominance," Jiwon explained. "We're more interested in learning from other species and contributing to galactic civilization than improving our capabilities through displays of force." Tae-hyun's expression became more serious. "However, we should address an important point. Human military capabilities represent a significant factor in galactic security planning." His display showed strategic analyses that made several military observers lean forward with intense interest. Human ground forces can operate effectively on any world that supports life and many that don't. Human naval forces can function in environments ranging from gas giant atmospheres to the vacuum of space. Most significantly, human forces can adapt to new tactical situations faster than most species can recognize that adaptation has occurred. Suman nodded grimly. Humans have been fighting wars continuously for over 5,000 years. We've developed tactical and strategic thinking that incorporates conflict scenarios most species have never considered. But, Jiwan interjected, quickly, humans strongly prefer peaceful solutions to conflicts. Our military capabilities exist primarily to defend ourselves and our allies, not to threaten other civilizations. Do-hyun's display showed human diplomatic and cultural achievements. Human contributions to galactic civilization include advances in medicine, engineering, philosophy, and arts. We're particularly proud of our work in developing technologies that allow different species to cooperate more effectively. Professor Velthak stared at the overwhelming amount of new information. I find myself wondering how galactic academia could have so completely misunderstood human capabilities. Tae-hyun smiled diplomatically. Perhaps because humans didn't consider it important to correct these misunderstandings. We were more interested in learning about other species than in teaching them about ourselves. Also, Minho added from his seat, most humans find it amusing when other species underestimate us. We generally don't mind being considered harmless. The implications of this statement created another uncomfortable silence in the lecture hall. So humans deliberately allow other species to underestimate their capabilities? Professor Velthak asked. Not deliberately, Jiwan replied. We simply don't feel compelled to demonstrate our capabilities unless necessary. Humans are generally more interested in solving problems than in impressing others. Suman's expression became more serious. However, I should mention that human military doctrine specifically incorporates the advantage of being underestimated by potential opponents. If other species assume we're weak, they're less likely to take appropriate precautions against human capabilities. The military observers in the audience began taking extensive notes. I think, Professor Velthak said slowly, that I need to completely revise my curriculum on human studies. Tae-hyun nodded approvingly. We'd be happy to provide accurate information. For your research, humans believe that better understanding between species leads to better cooperation. I should warn you, though, Minho said with a slight smile, that humans consider Australia, a continent filled with animals and plants that regularly kill humans, to be a popular vacation destination. The lecture hall fell completely silent, as alien minds struggled to process this final piece of information. We also have a saying, Minho continued. When humans are about to attempt something particularly dangerous or impossible, we often say, "Hold my beer and watch this." As the human holograms faded and the alien students began filing out of the hall in thoughtful silence, Professor Velthak realized that his understanding of the galaxy had fundamentally changed. The humans weren't a primitive species that had somehow achieved spaceflight despite their limitations. They were apex predators who had learned to cooperate, create, and dream while conquering the most hostile world in their region of space. They didn't just survive. They made survival look easy while simultaneously developing art, philosophy, and technology that enhanced the lives of every species they encountered. Minho packed his notebook, nodded politely to Professor Velthak, and walked toward the exit. As he reached the door, he paused and looked back. "Professor," he said, "if you're interested in really understanding humans, you might want to study our response to the phrase, 'That's impossible.' We tend to take it as a personal challenge." With that, he left the lecture hall, leaving behind an audience of aliens who suddenly understood why human expansion across the galaxy had been so remarkably rapid and why other species found human colonists to be such valuable allies. The age of underestimating humanity had quietly come to an end.